Good morning, class. Yesterday we looked at the different muscle tissues, and one of those was cardiac muscle tissue, and it's found only in the heart, and that's what we want to look at today. So, next slide here is just a quick review from yesterday. This was cardiac muscle tissue. Because of the striations that it's got, it used to be considered striated muscle tissue, the same as skeletal muscle tissue. Then microscopes got better and they could see this intercalated disc between the cells, and then they realized the cells were mononucleated also. Okay, and key with this is that we find it only in the heart, and we want to look at the heart today. So here's some structures that we see on this. This is one picture that I found that showed the diaphragm. You studied membranes around different cavities, two-layered membranes, and visceral pericardium, that is the membrane that's touching the heart. Parietal pericardium is the membrane further away. Okay, the space between it is pericardial cavity. There we see it over there. All right. Next slide will name some of these parts of the heart for you. I see the left atrium and the right atrium that receive blood. Right atrium gets from the rest of the body, and this is going to be the superior vena cava on the next slide. Superior vena cava. On the next slide, we'll see it'll show a better view of the inferior vena cava, which will be coming from down from below. Okay, and both of those will empty into the right atrium. That's how blood first gets to the heart. Left atrium, this is where the blood comes back from the lungs, and I believe it's going to be through these two structures right here, through these two pulmonary veins lead to the heart. Okay, next on it. Like I said, it has some more things labeled on it. This the big aorta, the largest blood vessel in the body, the largest artery in the body, definitely comes from blood being pumped out of the left ventricle. Now, when we cut this, when the heart's going to be cut in half, we'll see the blood pumped up. Actually, it's internal. It's going underneath all this stuff, then out the aorta. Okay, tremendous amount of pressure there. It turns out the left ventricle. So this blood goes to the rest of the body. So actually, when it gets up here, it takes a nosedive and goes down. We'll see some other diagrams down below here. This aorta coming out below, and it's referred to as the descending aorta. Okay, so as soon as it comes out of the heart, it takes a nosedive and goes down. A lot of the different organs in the body. So, anyway, when we slice the left ventricle, when we slice the heart, you'll see that the wall in the left ventricle is much, much thicker than the wall in the right ventricle. The right ventricle has to pump the blood up to, just up and over to the lungs, just out through the pulmonary trunk, which is this part, into the pulmonary arteries. Right? Those go to the lungs. Right? Here's a better look at the inferior vena cava as blood comes from the lower part of the body. The superior vena cava, the blood is coming from the upper part of the body, and it's gathered here in the right atrium. Okay? All right, next. Here is the heart sliced, where you can see the internal structures a little bit more. Oh, by the way, this point of the heart is called the apex of the heart. Okay, that's the apex. Okay, other structures that we're looking at here. As we're looking internally, it starts to show some of the valves, and let's start tracing how blood comes in. So blood comes in through the superior vena cava. It comes in through the inferior vena cava, and it collects in here in the right atrium. So I'm going to put a 2 by there. That's kind of the second structure besides the vena cavas, which would be number 1s. That's how blood comes in the first place. Then it collects in number 2 in the right atrium. It goes through this valve which is known as, one name is the tricuspid valve. It's also known as the right atrioventricular valve. Okay, tricuspid, as we take a different look at it, we'll see three main lobes of it. Okay, this is pronounced chordae tendineae, and this is referring to the tendons, that these muscles, which over here we see they are labeled papillary muscles. Okay, the papillary muscles contract. Papillary muscles contract and they pull on the tendons, tightening, and the tendons attached to the valves, and it pulls them open. Okay, so blood flows from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. I'm going to put a number 4 down here for right ventricle. All right. When the right ventricle contracts, it pushes blood out through these half moon shaped valves. They open up and the blood is pumped out. It's on its way to the lungs. Okay, this valve is, well, it's headed to the lungs, so that's pulmonary, and it's half moon shaped, so semilunar. Pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, and it's off to the lungs, where it's exchanging, where a lot of oxygen is coming in, a lot of CO2 is coming out. Okay, then blood comes back from the lungs through the pulmonary veins, and it collects here in the left atrium. Okay, actually we need to go back and number some things. 1, it comes through the vena cavas. 2, into the right atrium. 3, tricuspid valve. 4, the right ventricle. 5, it goes out the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. We'll make that lungs number 6. Okay, it comes from the lungs, it comes back into the pulmonary veins. We'll make those number 7, and it collects in here in the left atrium. That's the number 8. All right, then it's pumped through. It goes through the valve that opens up. Now this is on the left side, so this name is the bicuspid valve, or it's called the mitral valve. All right, there's something called mitral valve prolapse, that about 6% of all the people in the United States have that. 6% of the adults in this country that we know of. Okay, so blood collects in number 8, goes through number 9, the bicuspid or mitral valve, into number 10, the left ventricle. Number 10, the left ventricle. When left ventricle contracts, see, here's the aortic semilunar valve. This is the opening that goes underneath here, so it's a dashed line into the aorta. Okay, so since they're half moon shaped, semilunar, it's leading into the aorta, so aortic semilunar valve. Okay. And once it's in the aorta, the blood is going to the rest of the body. And like I said, this wall thickness, and you can't tell by here, you know, the chamber of the right ventricle, chamber of the left ventricle, they look about the same. Actually, the right one looks a little bit more on this one, but the left ventricle is going to be significantly thicker. You'll be able to look at it and see that it is the strongest one. Okay, this section that separates, we'll see this later, this section that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle is the interventricular septum. Inter means between, ventricular, well, it's between the ventricles, septum. Okay, this is some fibrous connective tissue in between this. Okay, next one. Here's just another look at the openings to the valves. As the tricuspid, you can see 3 different lobes of it. On the bicuspid or the mitral valve, or this name, another name is this is on the left side, the left atrioventricular valve. Tricuspid, right atrioventricular valve. Okay, the semilunar valves. The right ventricle pumps blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve, okay, half moon shape. And the left ventricle pumps blood through the aortic semilunar valve out to the aorta and the rest of the body. Okay, I think we have one more slide. Okay, this is cool. This is called the conduction. This is referring to the conduction system of the heart. Okay, the heart can beat on its own, and you may know someone who has this SA node, which stands for sinoatrial, where they had to have that replaced. What's the nickname of that? It actually gives off an impulse. It's known as the pacemaker of the heart. It actually makes an impulse and sends that out through these fibers. And this is cool. We have in this chamber right here, we have, okay, right atrium blood collecting from above and from below, collects in here, and blood is coming back from the lungs from the left side and from the right side. So again, two openings, the blood collects in here. So as the SA node gives off an impulse, it goes to these fibers on the right atrium and over to these fibers on the left atrium, and both the atria contract at pretty much the same time and push blood down into the ventricles at the same time. All right. Meanwhile, as the ventricles are filling up with blood, the impulse makes its way to the AV node, which is known as the atrioventricular node, also known as atrioventricular node. And it's delayed a little bit. Then it has to go through this thick fibers called the AV bundle or atrioventricular bundle. That's the thick part right here. Okay, and when it branches off, okay, these branches are known as Purkinje fibers. And you can see that continuing down here, it looks like a nerve. Okay, it's not. It's this is all modified muscle tissue, including the SA node and the AV node. It's all modified muscle tissue. When we learned about epithelial tissue, we said, oh, epithelial tissue is the inner and outer lining on almost everything in the body, every organ, inside and outside. Well, here's the exception where we said almost. It's the heart. The inner lining of the heart is not epithelial tissue. It's modified muscle tissue. Okay, it looks like epithelial. It looks like a cuboidal shaped cell, but it's not. Okay, so everything about the heart is muscle. It's modified muscle tissue. Okay. Okay. Meanwhile, all right, we had the atria fill up with blood. The SA node sent impulses out, and these contract at the same time and push blood down into the respective ventricles. Meanwhile, the impulse makes its way through these fibers, down the Purkinje fibers, down both sides, makes the loop around the apex, comes up, spreads out, and by that time the ventricles are filled up with blood, and then they contract and they push blood out. The left ventricle pushes it out the aorta, and the right ventricle pushes it off to the lungs. Okay, and so this is what's considered, as I said, the electrical. We'll put that on there. The electrical conduction system of the heart. All right, and that's it. Thank you very much.